Let's talk about how does erosion happen in a desert. So the primary method that erosion occurs in a desert is going to be due to water. And water can come in the form of a flash flood. So in a desert, when it doesn't tend to rain a whole lot, but when it does rain, it really comes down. And so you have a lot of water on the floor of the desert at once, and then a lot of that water cannot soak into the ground fast enough, so it's going to flow on the surface of the desert, and it tends to make flash floods. And just like a flash flood in a river can move boulders and can carve canyons, so can flash floods in a desert. The next one is called a ephemeral stream. And so this is going to be water that is initially flowing in a river, but it starts to sink under the ground and get into the groundwater. And so it just seems like this river just stops for no apparent reason. So another name for these are called arroyos and wadis. Okay, then another type of erosion is going to be caused by the wind. And so this could be the actual impact of the wind on a rock. Now that really doesn't do a whole lot of erosion. But if that wind contains dust, that dust, as it makes an impact on the rock, can cause erosion. Sand is an even better method of erosion because sand is going to be made of quartz. Quartz is very resistant to being eroded, and so the impact of sand grains on rocks can do a lot of erosion. And then also the impact of pebbles. So notice that this is very similar to what a river can do. So river erosion can be due to the impact of the water itself. It can be due to the impact of mud and clay that is suspended in the water. It could be due to the impact of sand that is rolling on the bottom of the river channel, and then it could be due to the impact of pebbles and rocks as well. So this is going to be erosion that's going to be caused by wind. So how does transport happen in a desert? So it all depends on the strength of the wind. So in the case of a river, it all depended on the strength of the water that was flowing in the river. But now we're talking about wind. So in a river, you had materials that were suspended. You had materials that were bouncing on the bottom of the channel. And then you also had materials that were rolling and sliding on the bottom of the river channel. Notice we use the same things when we talk about what the wind can do. So the dust can be suspended in the wind. You could have sand grains that are bouncing on the desert floor, and then you could also have more heavy objects that could be pushed on the surface of the desert floor, and we're going to call that creep. So the wind, as it carries these suspended particles of dust, can cause dust storms, and it can completely obscure the sun, and these dust storms can sandblast cars, take off the paint as a result of the dust that is being blown around by this wind. Okay, how does deposition happen in a desert? Well, let's again go back to our lesson on rivers, and we found that it all depended on the speed of the river, and it also depended on the size of the particles. So if the speed was of the water was fast enough, it could basically transport anything, including boulders. But as the speed of the river decreased, we found that smaller and smaller particles could be transported by a river. The same thing is going to be true for wind processes. So wind can push around dust pretty easily, but it's going to have a harder time carrying sand, unless of course it's one of these dust storms here. It's really going to have a hard time pushing anything larger than a pebble on the surface of the desert. But this chart here shows areas in which erosion will take place, areas in which transportation will take place, and then areas in which deposition will take place. So let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about what are some types of desert landforms.